Scott Boras waited until there was less than 48 hours before opening day to find a home for Jordan Montgomery, and he has to do it right after myself and my co-host Patrick Lyons spent an hour and 15 minutes discussing the best off seasons in all of baseball, with a lot of that conversation at times touching on Jordan Montgomery still being on the market. Now he's off the market and he signed with the Arizona Diamondbacks, which changes a lot of the video that you're going to watch after my little intro here. We talked about the division. We talked about the Giants. We talked about the Dodgers. We talked about, of course, the Padres, and then as well, the Diamondbacks, and how good of an offseason they had prior to this acquisition. All of a sudden, spoiler alert, we get to a conclusion at the end of the video where we were between the Giants and the Diamondbacks for, I guess, technically the second best offseason in this division. The Dodgers we just sort of set off to the side. But now, if that was a conversation we were kind of neck and neck on the decision, Jordan Montgomery puts the Diamondbacks over the top. And that's also what he's going to do for them this season. To add Jordan Montgomery into the fold when they already added in Eduardo Rodriguez, and granted, Eduardo Rodriguez being hurt might have necessitated this move, but if you can get to the playoffs with your rotation healthy and intact, you have the two guys that got you there last year, Zach Gallen and Merrill Kelly. You're the guy that beat you in Jordan Montgomery. You have Eduardo Rodriguez, who has plenty of experience, and then you still have the upside of a Brandon Pfaadt. So all of a sudden, this Diamondbacks rotation looks loaded. They did everything else they had to throughout the offseason to fortify their roster, and they didn't have to make this move. They had pitching depth in place, and we never really expected them to all of a sudden spend $25 million more on top of all the spending that they've already put together throughout the offseason. I'd have to check, but I think they are now well north of $150 million spent on this team. I mean, just on the surface, Erod and Montgomery are, when it comes to $80 million in contracts to Rodriguez, 25 to Montgomery. Not to mention there's a vesting option on this deal that could be for as little as $20 million or as much as $25 million, depending on innings pitched this year. They're spending money in Arizona. They went to the World Series, and they have influxed that cash from that World Series run right back into this team's payroll. And I love what they've done this offseason. So you're about to watch Patrick and I discuss all the different teams in this division, what they did, and how they can compete this year. And the Diamondbacks just made the move that puts them right atop the list, where if we're looking at National League teams that should make the playoffs this year, Dodgers and Braves are that tier one. To me, now tier two is the Diamondbacks and the Phillies. They should be at least wildcard teams this year. I can't wait to see it. I also can't wait for you guys to watch the rest of this conversation. A lot of good stuff on the National League West. Moving over to the National League West, who had the best offseason in this division? The Los Angeles Dodgers. Let's close it up, and we'll just end the podcast, right?
Yep. Thanks, Ryan. At Patrick D. Lyons on Twitter. Los Angeles Dodgers, best offseason in the world. Best offseason ever? Yeah, probably.
Which is why we can't really include them in this conversation. We'll say it. It was amazing. They got the best baseball player ever, Shohei Ohtani. They used his deferred contract to get Yoshinobu Yamamoto, potentially the best pitcher to come over from Japan. His first start wasn't great, but I'm not going to be too worried about him just yet. And then, of course, they also get Tyler Glass now. They bring back Jason Hayward. They eventually flip Margot so that they can bring back Kike Hernandez. And I mean, the list probably goes on and on. James Paxton. They just are on paper the best team in baseball heading into this season. But let's look at the other three teams here that are vying for a playoff spot: the Padres, the Giants, and the Diamondbacks. They all did stuff. They all made moves. I want to make an early case for the Diamondbacks, though. Coming off the World Series, what's the number one thing they got to do? Get a quality starting pitcher to slot into the rotation. They signed Eduardo Rodriguez to a fair contract, $80 million, 4 years. He had familiarity with the manager and the general manager because they both date back to their time in Boston. They were comfortable with them. They bring him in. And also, there was some early reports in camp. I saw Ken Rosenthal in Foul Territory talking about how Erod was really taking some of the young pitchers under his wing. So that's really important too. Brandon Pfaadt, if he can be some semblance of what he was in the postseason, I like their 1 through 4. And then they got Jock Peterson. They got Randall Grichuk to help out that DH spot. They trade for Eugenio Suarez to give them a real power threat at third base. It's a huge upgrade over what they rolled out last year, in my opinion. I love what the Diamondbacks did. It's a continuation also from adding Paul Sewald at last year's deadline. He's still in the mix this year. I think they go into this season with a team that doesn't have a lot of holes and has a ton of upside when Corbin Carroll's going into year 2 after getting MVP votes in year 1.
They added so much, and the list is so long that I'm not. Did you mention Jock Peterson?
I did. I
You
did.
did. Okay. Like that's how good it was. And to your point with Eduardo Rodriguez, my one day going over there down in spring training at Salt River Fields, I saw Eduardo Rodriguez in the corner with a couple players talking. I figured they were just hanging out. It was later in the day, and they're on their way out. Talk with Torey Lovello, Corbin Carroll, and they were still over there talking about 45 minutes later, where he was just holding shop, talking with these young guys. So I think that clubhouse presence is going to be great for, a young group that the Diamondbacks had. Evan Longoria was that guy for them last year, and now to bring in a pitcher like that, I think is going to be critical, especially for a lot of the Latin American players in that bullpen. So Mike Hazen has just had the master stroke. I'm kind of curious to see what happens with a guy like Christian Mena, who they got from the White Sox, who I can't quite figure out why they made that trade, but nevertheless, the Diamondbacks got another great young starting pitcher for that AAA rotation. That's really solid. So yeah, I think the Diamondbacks, other than those LA Dodgers, I mean, was a really strong offseason that you have to say answered the call to what the expectations were. If not, I would think improve. So if we're talking about it from that perspective of, hey, what would be good? They went above what would be a good offseason for that fan base. And we'll talk about, some other teams that, they were probably what they should have been. There was a great offseason, but was it what was expected? Yeah. So it's maybe harder to give them bonus points for that.
Yeah, you look at the Giants and the Padres, and they did what they should have done. They did a lot of work late, which helps them. I mean, if we were talking, before all these late signings in the Dylan Cease trade, they would have been clearly at the bottom, and we could have said bad off seasons for them. I do think they did nice things, but I still believe the Diamondbacks are the better team on paper than either of those other clubs here because they just have, to me, a much higher floor. I look at that Padres lineup right now, and I think they did well in the Juan Soto trade, considering the context of 1 year left. They needed pitching. They didn't have money to spend on pitching, and they used Juan Soto to get that depth of pitching that their rotation needed. So it worked and it made sense. But look at that lineup once you get past, 1 through 5, the back end of that lineup, to me, it's a real question. And even going out and getting Tommy Pham, that would have done so much for them. And I still don't know why they haven't put pen to paper on that contract that I've been waiting for weeks now.
Yeah, they saw the success he had in division with the Diamondbacks, and how positive he was as a role model, believe it or not, in that clubhouse. Yeah, there are questions with the Padres that they helped in some areas and they hurt themselves and just didn't really answer the call and really trying to round out the bottom half of that lineup, as you said, or even their bench. Right, they've got some young guys where you might not know what their upside is yet with Eggy Rosario and Graham Pauley. Kyle Higashioka, nice backup catcher to have. And so, there are those pieces there that are unknown, but any offseason where you're just adding unknown pieces, it's hard to give a team credit and say, hey, you went out and did a wonderful job. As far as the future of the franchise, hey, trading 1 year of Juan Soto for 2 of Dylan Cease after you lost nearly an entire rotation in free agency, I think it is nice, but overall it lacks a little bit. Jackson Merrill, making the opening day roster. Okay. You can give them some credit for that, but overall for an off season where you have to compare with a club like the Diamondbacks or the Giants, which we'll get to here in a second. I think the Padres, definitely fall short there.
I do too. And I think the Giants, in some ways, because of what they did at the end, they do enter this conversation because you added Matt Chapman. Blake Snell was obviously the big one, and Soler before it. You can make an argument like look at their team right now outside of Logan Webb. Those might be like three of the top five performers this season that they just added right before the start of the season. So they did a lot of great work late here, and they do have a roster on the surface that can contend. The bullpen strong, and they have this great 1-2 punch down this rotation. I don't think it's quite up to the level of the Diamondbacks, but they did a lot of nice things.
I do. I think they're the players that they acquired are better than the players that Diamondbacks acquired. But the thing that's difficult too is, was this really a part of their plan? Like it works out for them, right?
Yeah.
It's just like, again, when we talked about Wyatt Langford breaking, camp with the Rangers, and Jackson Merrill with the Padres. How much credit are you giving like the front office? Like, oh, they made this thing happen, and that was a part of the plan. Like it worked out great, and you should get credit. But if we're saying, was that actually part of the plan? It's kind of a different, conversation. Give the Giants credit. They broke Scott Boras, right? But no one had really, no one single team had ever broken Scott Boras like this. So they're kind of the beneficiaries of a very unique situation that up until the start of spring training, it was really only Jordan Hicks and Jung Hoo Lee, a catcher, and Tom Murphy. Other than that, they're kind of in the right place at the right time. So, if we're looking at motives here, it becomes hard to give the Giants that credit in their offseason. But I think on paper, I would say that the Giants had a better offseason just on paper than the Diamondbacks.
I think you might have swayed me. I think what I was doing, and I think you kind of went into my brain and figured out my thought process is I liked what the Diamondbacks did. I liked the process they went about it. They were aggressive, and we love seeing teams do that. And so maybe I'm rewarding Mike Hazen because there was the needs on paper. He went out and he checked them off one by one by one. But when you think about this offseason, who took advantage of this situation better than anyone else? The Giants did, and they got contracts that aren't going to kill them. Um, I don't necessarily love Matt Chapman, but on that contract, you start to love Matt Chapman. He's going to give you good defense, and there's the hope that he could take some semblance of what he was last April and actually maybe spread it out over a full season. And yeah, I mean, Blake, I guess also I'm probably underrating the Blake Snell acquisition. So many teams have told us that he's not valuable this offseason that I think we're starting to believe it, and we're not remembering what he was last year in this same division. And if he's that again, yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I think you got me swayed here. I think the Giants, outside of course, the Dodgers, I think the Giants probably did have the best offseason in this division.
The best way I think maybe to describe the Giants and the Diamondbacks offseason and comparing them is like going to Vegas. You've got the Diamondbacks who went, they know how to count cards. They're in the right way, and they're playing blackjack. They're doing it really smart, and they came out ahead, and they got to feel good, and they look intelligent for what they did. They were able to follow through on their plan. And then you have the Giants, who it seems like they're down to their last $5, and they just kept letting it ride on the roulette wheel. And then they hit 1, 2, 3 in a row, and all of a sudden they're walking out going, "Hey guys, I'm treating dinner tonight. We're going to the buffet, and I'm buying." And you go, "Oh, Giants, man, they did great." But it's not going to happen that way every single offseason.
Yeah, it's not necessarily a repeatable plan. If it is, Scott Boras might actually be falling off, but it definitely was that. It was like you said, right place, right time. That they hit a bunch of moves late, and they really are. I mean, you look at the wild card race in the National League. That the Giants cannot be slept on. And again, we thought that they were not even going to be in it until they pulled off all these moves. And also, you know what? To give them credit too, the Jung Hoo Lee edition was very solid for them to shore up their outfield. And Jordan Hicks has looked. I mean, what do you have like 5 no-hit innings with 10 strikeouts in his final spring start? Something crazy like that. So if Jordan, look, if Jordan Hicks becomes this during the regular season and Snell is right, and of course Logan Webb's as dependable as you get, it's a sneaky good rotation.
It's very good. Yeah, they if we're talking about the win-loss record, it could be problematic for them, where they're going to have some up and downs, especially if they have any more, pitcher injuries, since they're counting on those young guys and Keaton Wynn and Kyle Harrison. But yeah, they brought in some big time players, right? I mean, Jorge Soler is going to be the first right-handed hitting slugger for the Giants to get 30 home runs since Barry Bonds. So like, man, that fan base has suffered for a while. And if we're gonna wrap up put a bow on the NL West, we still also have to talk about the Colorado Rockies. There's not much to go into, right? They brought in Jacob Stallings and Dakota Hudson on free agent deals. They acquired Cal Quantrill as designated for assignment, a player from Cleveland. So I think that was a really nice trade for them and their rotation, to split up the two lefties in Kyle Freeland and Austin Gomber. And they made some interesting trades going into opening day here in the final weeks of spring training. They get a fourth outfielder type in Jake Cave. They get a prospect in Greg Jones that can play a little middle infield as well as center field, to give Brenton Doyle a couple days off here and there. But they had to give up a pretty decent pitching prospect to do so. But yeah, overall, the Rockies were easily the quietest team in this division.
They were, but you know what? They did make some moves. And when you look at all five teams here, we're just talking about the Central. I think the NL West might have had the best offseason collectively when you look at, especially, when you add in what the Dodgers did, which we again, we're kind of setting them aside, but that absolutely gives them a ridiculous amount of talent that got brought out West.
Yeah, we'll pool the Dodgers and Rockies players together, divide it in half, and then
There
you
you go.
say, okay, who had the best off season for division? Yeah, I think you put the NL West at the top there.
Well, that wraps up our breakdown of all of the best off seasons that we watched that these teams pull off here. Excited for opening day. We've broken up this into multiple videos on YouTube, as those of you watching on YouTube have already figured out. If you are, hit that subscribe button to be up to date on all of our latest. Also, check out the podcast feed if you want to listen to the entire show all in one spot. You can do that there. And we will continue to give you some more content throughout this season, breaking down who is better in baseball.